It's an artist's conception, but it's as accurate as we can make it for tonight's presentation, which involves the lost city of Atlantis, the antediluvian civilization that was supposedly destroyed in one day and a night, according to Plato. I think it was in the Timaeus. Anyway, the latest space archaeology, and when we say space archaeology, we're talking about satellite photographs from space and drones surveying specific areas and uncovering geological features, archaeological features. And this has, people have been aware of this for some time. I wasn't, but I was investigating it. I was asked to investigate it by Dr. Douglas Baker about 10 or 11 years ago. Part of the investigation not only included what is called the Eye of the Sahara, it's also known as the Eqypt structure. I'll explain those in just a minute. But I was fascinated with the idea that what we've long been taught and told as the Pillars of Hercules, there was another Pillars of Hercules. And it took some time to find that, but it all finally came together recently, fairly recently, during this COVID shutdown, which I thought was interesting. So we're going to go through this tonight with Atlantis, where we think it was, the pyramids, new teachings on the pyramids, new information. We're going to talk about the diaspora or the exodus or the migration of Atlanteans eastward all the way down to southern India, where the great Manu Vaivasvata began to insert himself, if I can use a term that crude, began to change the DNA, the atomic vibration of the DNA, and allowed a new race to form. The esoteric teachings tell us that there are 7 sub-races, 7 root races, and that each of the root races has 7 sub-races, and the sub-races, 7 sub-races have 7 tribes. And if you've suffered a Christian upbringing, you're probably in the Bible aware of a lot of talk about tribes and wars. And Moses was in reality the Manu figure. It was the Hebrew interpretation that was given to them by the Egyptian hierophants of the story of the Manu. And Moses fits all of the descriptions of what a Manu does. He is the father of the race. He is the lawgiver. Moses gave laws. The Manus give laws to their races. And so we're going to go through this tonight with some interesting insights. I will describe and name the 7 root races, and eventually it will lead us really to modern times, this whole vast episode that we're going to see here tonight in a very brief period of time. So we have to get moving. This was what the pyramids actually looked like. They were painted, they were white stone, and they were painted, and they had a gold capstone at the top. That capstone, a portion of the framework of it, has been found. In fact, there are pictures of Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval. It had an iron structure, and then it was laminated with gold over the capstone. And a part of that metal framework for the capstone was found, and there's some very interesting pictures of it in some of Graham Hancock's books and articles. This is what it looked like before it was painted, but it was essentially white with a gold capstone. It could be seen out to sea for as far as 30 miles, is 400 and some odd feet high, and the normal trajectory or sight of vision at sea level is 12 miles. But if you go up 400 feet to the top of the capstone, that light could be seen from 30 or 35 miles away, and ships at sea actually used it to navigate to the Giza Plateau area. There's a picture of it. They said even it could be seen on a full moon night, or a night where there was adequate moonlight, would glisten off of the capstone, and the sailors at sea could see the pyramids. This, of course, was really the structure we talked about in our earlier lectures of the Atlanteans, and goes back to 80,000 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that, to where it was a truncated pyramid. We showed pictures of a truncated pyramid built to the height of 50 stones, on which top was a astronomical observatory with the etchings on the platform of zodiacal signs and the configurations. I had an experience there where I was taken back to 80,000 years ago in the Akashic record, and I saw what we call the Grand Gallery was actually a telescope, and they would move the lenses up and down inside of what we call the Grand Gallery. It was changed. And eventually the pyramid was completed to the height of a capstone, but for many thousands of years, it was an astronomical observatory, and it was also the square top of it, which I can't show you right now, but I did, I think in the first lecture. It had the signs of the zodiac that they used at that time. It's not uncommon, I've seen them in Europe, square horoscopes, not round, but a square horoscope. And that was what the Egyptians were using. A similar astrology to what we call now in modern times, esoteric astrology had its origins in Egypt through the priests and hierophants of Egypt. This is a great lake that existed in the Sahara Desert about 250,000 years ago. The thing we have to understand is that the Sahara Desert has been a grassland plain. It's been a desert. It's been a shallow sea 1 million years ago or so, 250,000 certainly, or more than 250. But the geography and the topography of that northern part of Africa has changed dramatically. If I don't forget, I'll tell you a little bit about the Qatar Depression in Libya, which was a place for the Allies used during World War II. Very important. But this lake, as you can see, it was large, it shrank, it was filled by rivers. The Nile River originally flowed west into the grassland plain, into these lakes, and there were other rivers from the north, from the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, that filled this. There was one giant lake. I don't remember if this one was it or not. It was bigger than all of the Great Lakes together, a freshwater lake larger than all of our 5 Great Lakes put together. It's worth thinking about. There's also tremendous water stored in what is called the Ethiopian sandstone aquifer, which is a massive, massive aquifer right under the Sahara Desert, fairly close and west of Ethiopia. Here's showing a view of Africa and a giant inland sea that flowed through Africa, a salt waterway, and I believe it filters out here at somewhere down here in this area of Africa. But the water actually flowed from the Mediterranean. There was a time in the Mediterranean when it was a valley. And then through cataclysmic events that took place, it was eventually filled with water. But there was a time where there were small lakes and rivers in the Mediterranean basin. So the earth has changed and altered many, many times. This is the point of interest for tonight's lecture. Through space archaeology, this region right here is where what we believe, scientists call it the Eye of the Sahara, or Rickard's structure. The people that don't believe in Atlantis say that it's a geological anomaly that was formed that created these concentric rings through a force underneath the Sahara that was pushing up and rippled out. The people who are pro antediluvian civilizations believe that in fact it corresponds perfectly in its measurements to Plato's account given to him by his uncle or relative Solon, the great Greek philosopher who had gotten the information from Egyptian priests and gave it to Plato. Anyway, let's just read what this says here for the audience. Here, the nearby mountains were seen as representatives of the gods and celebrated for their lush rivers and waterfalls. These mountains were said to be in the north, the precise location of the Eye's Mountains. When you look at the satellite images of the Eye, you can see the river and water lines that appear throughout the landscape. It's a very, very important image. We'll possibly get back to that. This is the structure that we say corresponds to Plato's measurements for Atlantis. And there were 3 concentric rings filled with water. Here in the center was probably the government, the headquarters of this race of people that were living there at that time. There's an immense history. This isn't a history of 5 or 10,000 years like most scientists would have you believe. This is a history of 1,000,000 years. And people, they always raise questions about the pyramids of South America and China, and I'll try to explain some of that. If I don't get to it tonight, we'll get to it next Wednesday. But there are esoteric explanations for the races and the developments of these civilizations that really are the root race, the sub-races of the Atlantean root race found in South America and China and different parts of the world. So that's kind of what it looks like. I think, I don't know if that's the actual photograph or not, but there's one thing I need to tell you just real quick. The people that live in this part of Mauritania mine salt, and these areas that are white are massive salt deposits that were brought in when ocean waters flooded, probably tsunamic origin, and washed away what we're calling Atlantis. The salt is there. And here's the artist image of the description of Atlantis given by Plato. And here is the Eye of the Sahara, and it corresponds perfectly with Plato's description. It's worth thinking about. I don't think anybody, from an esoteric point of view, you're the first people to get this information in the whole world. I mean, nobody's got an esoteric perspective on it. And that's what we're talking about tonight. Yeah, it's interesting. Here it says that black, red, and lighter white, he described them as white, Plato did. Colored rocks were reported to be embedded throughout the land of Atlantis. This is also true of the eye. So these black rocks and red rocks and white rocks are found in the proximity of this structure here, and that the buildings of Atlantis were built out of these stones. So that corresponds. The entire geography, topography of Africa has changed, as I said earlier, many, many times. And to look at a map today, it's not going to tell you very much until you get out in space further and then look at it, and you can see these the residue of rivers, basins of lakes, shallow seas. They're finding the skeletons of whales when the Sahara was an inland, a shallow sea. And we'll get to Leadbeater's maps in a minute, the great theosophical clairvoyant, and we'll talk about the maps and some things that Leadbeater had to say about them. But it was said that fresh water flowed from the center island of Atlantis, which also exists in the center circle of the eye. We just saw that in our last picture. So here we are. Again, this is the area of the eye. This coastline had changed dramatically. Even this doesn't show it, but this land here, fairly close to Atlantis, was the ocean. The land rose and fell many times over immense periods of time. And you can see the outline of the Sahara Desert where it is today, and where it used to be. And it's an incredible change in the landmass. This is really interesting photograph because this is caused by immense flooding of water caused these ripples, and these ripples are huge. These are like giant hills and mountains in between. I mean, a human being would be a speck of dust in these. They're so vast and so big. So it shows that some really enormous event, catastrophic event took place. Here again is the eye of the Sahara, which we're saying is Atlantis, the remnant of Atlantis. About 9,000 years ago, was it 11,500 years ago is the timeline for the final destruction. This is the explanation that was given by Plato. The circular isle of Atlantis was described to have a diameter of 127 stadia. One stadia is 607 feet, and multiply that, and the result is 77,089 feet. This is equivalent to around 14.6 miles in diameter. So that's this center area here. Plato's Critias and Timaeus dialogues, in his dialogues, he describes Atlantis as three alternating zones. 1, 2, 3 water zones. 1, 2, 3 land zones. Water, 2 of land, which could easily be transposed onto the physical structure of the eye. So if we had another photograph of the Eye of the Sahara, you could see, as I was trying to show you earlier, that this is just amazing how it fits. And the measurements that Plato gave us fit perfectly to the Eye of the Sahara or to the Eqypt structure, as some geologists call it, who refuse to believe in it. So the idea of Greek scholars going into Egypt are mentioned in a lot of writings and accounts of Atlantis. It wasn't just Solon, and it wasn't just Plato who described the Atlantean civilization. This is an interesting piece here because it's showing a giraffe. This is in a sandy desert area of the Sahara, a cave, and it's showing people that lived there. They had bows and arrows and hunted the animal that were prevalent, and one of them was a giraffe that lived there when it was a grassland plain. Ancient drawings, lakeside and grassland animals, and even flowers. Plato reported that elephants and many other animals were abundant on Atlantis. Many elephant bones have been found near the Eye of Africa. There have been thousands of artifacts found in and around the Eqypt structure. Most are 12,000 years old or older, which puts them in the time frame of Atlantis. These items include arrowheads, spear stones, spheres, surfboards, oars, ships, ship hulls, and more. So up until this came out, there was no record of any Atlantean ships, which I remember talking to Dr. Baker about. We thought it was very odd, but eventually they did find some remnants of their ships. I don't know how they used them, we don't know. It's all speculative. The old idea is that Atlantis was in the center of the Atlantic Ocean are completely patently false. There is no geological proof that any island existed there. There is not a granitic structure, nor is there a basaltic structure at the bottom of the Atlantic in the area that Ignatius Donnelly and other authors have said existed. There's no proof of that. It all sounds good and it makes a lot of sense, and I believed it for many years. I don't anymore. So a lot of research has to be done in this part of the world. Bring up Vajavasvata, the Manu, because that's an integral part of this story tonight. Can you get your sleeve? So we want to talk about this a little bit. I think the maps, the Leadbeater maps, will help us. A Manu is the procurer and creator of a root race. And the Atlanteans were what we call the fourth root race. They gave birth to the fifth root race. And the fifth root race gives birth to the sixth root race. It's always the corresponding subrace of the root race. I'll explain it this way. The fifth root race began to evolve out of the fifth subrace of the fourth root race. That's the way it works, right down the line. You can take it backwards and you can take it forward. So the sixth root race is emerging, just now beginning, the sixth subrace, The sixth subrace of the fifth root race is beginning to emerge in Western Australia. There are signs there. of an emerging, slightly different race of people. One of the things that the sixth root race will do is they will be able to assimilate massive amounts of prana through sunlight, because the etheric structures, the filaments between the nadis and the chakras, will be engorged. They'll be larger, bigger filaments, and will take in more prana. And this will be a significant factor in a lot of seventh ray physical bodies. Okay, this is the map that I wanted to tell you about. Now, Leadbeater, I believe, and Baker believed, and some other people believed, particularly in the English ashram, that this did not exist. He calls it Poseidon. That was the main island of Atlantis. We say it was actually here in Africa. And we know that this area around the Mediterranean submerged in water. Now, there are 200 and some odd cities that have been identified, not named, but they know that there are 200 and I think 30 some cities around the edge of the Mediterranean that we don't know how ancient they are. But as the water rose and fell in the Mediterranean, which is prone to dehydration, particularly the eastern end of the Mediterranean, if this water was shut off, the temperatures are so high, they're so hot in that part of the world that the Mediterranean would evaporate. And there are indications that we now know of where that has happened in the past, even after it was filled with seawater. Things closed off. The Straits of Gibraltar were sealed back up. There wasn't enough fresh river water to get in to hydrate the area we call the Mediterranean. But here's the interesting thing. He shows, can't read it because it's too small, but I have it elsewhere. This is from his book, Man, Whence, How, and Whither. Excellent book. A lot of it was based on clairvoyant perceptions and his ability to make contact with the Akashic records. And he shows a migration of people from this area right here in Africa across, and they come up through the Middle East, and then they descend down into India, and then they come back out again out of India and go back up into Europe. They come back in, and Leadbeater in his book talks about how the Manu is inserting himself in this great diaspora across over immense periods of time. He is inseminating the female members of these evolving races because he is of a higher atomic vibration. And not only does he carry it down into southern India, but back up again, back in, and then goes back to Egypt, and then comes back around again and goes into Europe, which is where the migration of the fifth or the Aryan root race, not to be confused with Hitler. I will give that information out maybe next week or the week after on the esoteric significance of Adolf Hitler in World War II and what was really happening from an esoteric perspective. That information was never allowed to be given out until now. And it's powerful stuff. Very powerful teachings. Nobody's talking about it. So we're going to talk about it. It shows here the Gobi Sea, which is where the Atlanteans eventually, the highest spiritual beings, stayed here In the Gobi Sea, there was an island, I think it was called the White Island. They lived there. The race evolved, the fifth Aryan root race evolved there. Eventually, the sea dried up, and the people that were habitating, if I've got this correct, the high spiritual beings ascended into the etheric realm. One of the most incredible pictures I've ever seen in my life. Probably the most incredible picture I've ever seen was a photograph that was taken of clouds that showed buildings that looked like they were beginning to materialize. And okay, we're running low on battery.
That's right.
Yeah. Can you get that plug back there? We're going to have to plug this in. Down on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
I can plug it in over there if you can.
Where?
Behind that board. Help her out there if you can, Tracy. Pull the papers out of the way. There's a socket on the wall. Just get those papers out of there. Unplug the lamp.
Oh, that's okay.
And plug this in. Thanks, Tracy. All right. Teamwork. This is a little better view, but it shows these migrations or diasporas of these evolving and changing root races and where they settled. They stayed down here in Ceylon. Leadbeater says they moved on into these islands, but certainly they were here in this part of India, and eventually they migrated back up out and then headed back over here into Europe. Yeah, that's a little closer close up of it, but it shows these pathways and so you get these stories in the Bible about tribes, the Philistines, and all these different groups of people and constantly warring, and that really did happen in the root races, and in particular in the Aryan or the fifth root race. Some tribes were completely wiped out. In fact, Alice Bailey, when they were asking her back during World War II, which is when the bulk of her writing took place, about World War II, and she said, they said, how do you explain that esoterically? And she said, it was an intertribal war. In my lecture on Hitler in World War II, I'll explain that to you. So yeah, these are another map. It shows the origins of religions, various religions. Many of them don't exist anymore, but they follow a definite pathway of people that were descendants of Atlantis and were beginning to morph and change into the Aryan race. The Hindus are the first root race of the Aryan race. The second root race of the Aryan or fifth root race were the Arabians or Iranians. Iran is a word that it means Aryan, to be an Aryan. In fact, Hitler in the 1930s sent emissaries to Iran. Back in those days, they called themselves Persians. And he told them they needed to change, quit calling themselves Persians and call themselves Iranians, because they were actually a part of the Aryan race, which is true. Hitler had a library of 16,000 occult books. He was a strict vegetarian. He knew this stuff because he himself was a subrace Manu of the fourth subrace of the fifth root race. So it's interesting that these religions change from Bethlehem and Jerusalem and the Judeo-Christian traditions were formed there, but also variations in the Hindu religions as well as the Buddhist. Mahayana Buddhism is an excellent explanation of theosophy, what theosophy is. I think Blavatsky even said one time, he said, "What is your religion?" And she said, Mahayana Buddhism. She was a Mahayana Buddhist. So I used to tell people I was a Mahayana Buddhist, but it's changed into something else. I'm not sure what it is anymore. Here it is again. It's the image of the Eye of Africa or Atlantis. And I think that I've zoomed through this. I think that might, I don't know if that's the last slide or not. Let me see. Yeah, it is. So we, in an alarmingly brief period of time, we got through a PowerPoint presentation with, we got, no, it is 40, it's 40 minutes. Does it show on there, Julia, how much time? Is it 5 minutes or is it over?
Well, right now is 8:10, so we 40 minutes actually. I think you want it to be like 45.
Yeah.
It's the perfect time, so you
Yeah.
have about 5 more minutes.
Okay, are there people there that want to ask questions? Can they ask questions?
Yeah, if you ask them, they will able to say if they do or not. There's I think about 8 people.
Now, this is recorded so people can watch it later in the week, because there were a lot of people who were having trouble for some reason logging on tonight.
Yeah.
But that happens every time.
I just okay. So there is a question. Kat, if you want, you can unmute yourself and ask yourself directly.
Can she hear us?
Yeah, she is.
Okay. Can we hear her?
Yeah, you can hear her too, but let me unmute her if I can do that. Oh.
Were you speaking to me?
Yes.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay. Hi, Dave. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good. My question was, did you just say that Hitler was a Manu?
No, I said he was a subrace Manu. And so was Winston Churchill.
A subrace Manu.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay. Not familiar. I mean, I understand the term, but I don't understand how he could have been one.
Because avatars will have to express themselves through both good and evil. You
Okay.
need to read, whose book is it? Annie Besant. Annie Besant wrote a book called Avatars, where she explains that. Yeah, people have trouble understanding how Hitler could be a subrace Manu. But the great thing that happened out of World War II that nobody's talking about on the planet is that it destroyed the dweller on the threshold of Europe. And the dweller on the threshold of America was never destroyed. It's hopefully being soon destroyed between now and 2025.
I do understand.
That the evil that makes up the dweller on the threshold of America will be destroyed hopefully soon. It's very esoteric subjects we're talking about here. Anything else?
Hey, you ask everybody because
Anybody?
everyone can hear you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm open for questions here too. We have people here at my home. If you want to ask some questions, Ron, yeah.
So Atlantis was basically 12,000 years ago?
Yeah, 11, 5, 12, yeah, right in there. That's when this inundation took place. But Atlantis existed for way longer than 12,000 years. That was just when it was destroyed, the final vestiges of it. The Egyptians did not build, can you turn the light on there? The Egyptians did not build the pyramids. The Atlanteans built the pyramids. We talked about some very esoteric things last week. One of the things that Bailey said about the pyramids, they were built from the top down. And so some people who feel they're esoteric surmise that it was an etheric structure and it began to concretize somehow from the top down. That's about as erroneous as you can get. What happened was the Giza Plateau was a massive outcropping of limestone hills and small mountains. And what they did was they cut the stones and slid them down until there were no stones left. They kept building pyramids, cities. It's all under the sand. What we see are just the ones that were left on the highest ground. And they're also, after those stones were cut, 80,000 years ago or more, there were immense Atlantean remnant people that were immense beings. They were guys who were 12 and 15 feet tall. They had tremendous strength, and they would work in squads, 5 and 6 people, men moving these stones, jockeying them around, and not sure how they cut them, but they had a system. I've seen some evidence of band cuts on cylindrical and cylinders of stone, and they were cut perfectly straight, just like you'd use a modern day tool. I've seen artist images of what they thought they were. These giant, they had huge wheels, and they had a wire that was diamond encrusted, and they used this immense wheel, probably 30 feet tall or more, and they would move the wheel, kind of like a grindstone. You'd move a grindstone. Only this, I think they probably just used their hands. Probably had those big Atlantean guys, and they cut those stones with these diamond impregnated wires, whatever the wires were made out of. And they were able to precision cut the stones.
Adam has a question for you.
Adam has a question. Okay.
Hey,
Hold by-
David, this is actually Andrea, not Adam.
Oh, Andrew. Hi,
I'm
Andrew.
logged in. Hi. Thank you so much for letting me join your lecture. You mentioned something real briefly about the 6th root race that's taking place, or could you expand on that a little more?
Yeah. Root races always emerge in isolated areas of the world. The Anglo-Saxon subrace emerged on the island of England and Scotland and in Ireland. And they were cut off from the rest of Europe and from the world. And so the emerging 6th root race, subrace, which will give birth, is giving birth right now to the 6th root race, is beginning to emerge in Western Australia, which in a strange way is isolated from the rest of Australia. It's just remote, and they kind of function on their own differently than being really inclusive with the rest of Australia. So it's emerging there.
So how has this, how has someone found this emerging subroot race? Or how do we know it's a subroot race, I guess? I'm new to this topic, so pardon
So
my.
it's me. This is Angel. Angel talking to you.
This is Andrea.
Andrea.
Andrea. Okay, I'm sorry.
I'll tell you how I know. The Nirmanakaya, who was Plato, told me. That's how I know. A Nirmanakaya is a 7th degree initiate being. He's like a Christ or a Buddha.
Yeah.
They're called divine rebels. They come in to aid struggling humanity. I'm sorry to be that abstruse, but what I'm telling you is true.
Well, I
And,
believe you 100%. I was just curious. I've not heard of the sixth race yet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Angel
It's a
has a,
good question. Yeah.
Angel has a question.
Angel, yeah.
Hi, David.
How
Thank you.
are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Good. We got a room full of people here tonight at my house. We just had a wonderful potluck dinner. And
I see. I
so
see.
I don't know, did you get to see the audience? I don't know if they showed.
Yes, I
you.
did. Thank you.
Okay. All
Thank
right.
you.
What's
Hello,
your
everyone.
question?
And thank you for allowing me to join your wonderful
Yeah,
group.
glad to have you.
Yeah, I've been a theosophist since 1998, and I love that you brought up the book Man, Whence, How, and Whither. I wanted to share another book with you on Atlantis. You may have heard of it. It's from the Theosophical Society. It was first printed in 1925, I believe. Something like that. Anyway, it is a book by W. Scott Elliott called The Story of Atlantis and the Lost Lemuria. And in there are world maps.
Mhm.
And from what I have understood is Atlantis is an epoch. It's not so much a place as it was.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And it lasted approximately 800,000 years. It fell 4 times. And these world maps show the land masses throughout the world map of how Atlantis, would be submerged underwater and then come back up on land,
Right.
etc.
Yeah. I think we talked a little bit about that tonight.
Yeah, so it said that the world after the great catastrophe of 80,000 years ago, and up to the final submergence of Poseidonus in 9,564 BC, which is in alignment with what you're saying. They do show Poseidonus, which was what I understood in the last epoch of Atlantis, was the capital. This was the capital after the one in Africa had been destroyed. And it was destroyed through large crystals that a group of people who were they were statesmen that came and they did a council and they agreed the only way to get the dark forces out was to destroy these dark crystals. And it resulted in a catastrophic, I would say close to like a nuclear explosion. And then it raised up again in that island in the Atlantic. So I think that might be part of the confusion, because some people are referring to the last epoch of Atlantis. And what I'm hearing you talk about in Africa seems to be prior to that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Baker told me that in World War II, he was there in the Libyan desert.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that if you could see the Qattara Depression, which is like 600 miles wide,
Mm-hmm.
pretty good sized piece of real estate, that he believes that there was an Atlantean city that was there, and through some geological catastrophe, it sank into the Mediterranean. That may explain the 200 and some odd cities that are found around the perimeter of the Mediterranean, but are underwater. And that has to be investigated and will be eventually. Just nobody's talking about it. There were giant oyster shells, huge, the size of basketballs and bigger, that were found there petrified from probably, Baker estimated, 20 to 30,000 years ago. So that entire area of Africa, the world itself, is constantly inundated. Land masses rise and fall. But the Qattara Depression needs to be investigated, because if Baker's hunch is right, there probably was an immense city there that was Atlantean in origin. What else would it be? And it disappeared. And so that's just west. It's in the Western Desert, west of the Giza Plateau.
Mhm.
So there could have been many different inundations.
Yes,
And we're only talking about one or two here.
Yeah.
Somebody else writes a book about it, whether it's Ignatius Donnelly or what was the fellow's name you just gave us, Scott?
yeah, his name, W. Scott Elliott. And
Yeah.
it is
I've
a
never
book.
read the book, but
It's excellent. And the maps are phenomenal.
I'll check it out.
Yeah, you would really love that. And by the way, I used to have a Maltese. I'm loving watching you with your dog.
Yeah. Not my doggy, but it's my friend.
Aw, sweet.
Okay. Is anybody else with any comments or questions? Anybody here?
Are the Aborigines, this Australian bunch, is that connected? to the-
Lemurians. They're
Are the Aborigines the natives of
Australia.
Australia?
They're Lemurian. They're a remnant of a Lemurian subrace. They're dying out rapidly too. That's eventually what happens. The Caucasian race will eventually die out. So will the Negro race. And they'll be replaced by races that are etheric in their structure and color. The Hindus in their scriptures show Krishna as being blue. And I know that sounds odd, but if you're dematerializing a physical body, are we still on or?
Yes, you may want to just say goodbye to everybody
Oh, yeah.
because they're still
We're gonna
in
get
here.
cut off. Okay, yeah, we'll say goodbye for tonight. I'm gonna talk to the audience here a little bit at the house and at my classroom here. And tune in next week and we'll have some follow-up for you. But we're running out of time, so. Anyway, yeah, the Lemurians. So yeah, they're a dying race. The American Red Indians are a dying race. They were part of the Atlantean root race. They were one of the sub races of the